As an individual from the Philippines, our culture has been deeply engraved in my being. Before I had access to the internet, the only opinions, morals, values, and mannerisms I observed were from the people around me. Now, with unlimited resources to reach out and interact with people from other countries with different cultures, I constantly compare the Philippine culture with theirs. Bits and pieces of your environment and culture make up your perception of the self. Asian families are often described as having a sense of togetherness, with parents almost always offering financial and emotional support to their children. In any stage of their lives, the parent and child relationship is expected to be unbreakable. An example of this is when adult children are expected to still live with their parents and even grandparents after marriage. It is not unusual for extended families to live together in a family home. This might sound inappropriate for people who grew up in Western culture, where they are expected to make a life for themselves by the time they are a legal adult. We often see teenagers who come onto social media to update their housing status and their experience of getting a job and needing to save up enough money for their college apartment, or European and American parents expect their child to grow independently and help them figure out how to navigate the world without coddling them. The Self in Eastern thought reflects Asian culture, while the Self in Western culture reflects American or European culture.
Imagine waking up one day forgetting who you are. No names, no titles, no jobs, no social media personality. It sounds a little bit terrifying, right? But what if I told you that in many other parts of the world, especially in the East, the idea of the self is far more complex than just your name or your job? Today, let's talk about the Eastern philosophies of the self and how each of them reshapes our understanding of who we truly are. So there's three: Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. So let's start with Confucianism. Confucianism comes from the teachings of Confucius, a Chinese philosopher, a teacher, and a political figure. The idea of Confucianism is that the self is not something isolated or independent. Instead, it is deeply tied into one's community. Meaning, your identity isn't built in isolation. You don't become your true self alone. You become who you are is defined by how you treat others. It is created through your relationships with your friends, your family, your neighbors, your teachers, your community. So if in Confucianism, if you want to be considered a good person, then you have to be a good son or a good child. You have to be a respectful child, a responsible citizen, or a good friend. Overall, Confucianism teaches us that in cultivating the self into what Confucius called a chunzu, or a person with a noble personality, requires self-discipline, ethical living, and respect for social relationships. But then, here's the catch. It also teaches us that the self is subdued, meaning it is not about fulfilling your personal desires, but rather repressing them for the greater good of the society. So, in modern terms, it is not about you do you, but more on about you do what is right for everyone. So now let's move on to Taoism, which feels like a chill breeze in a summer afternoon. Because if Confucianism gives you rules, Taoism, on the other hand, rejects strictness and instead hands you a cup of tea and says, relax, you don't have to try so hard. Taoism came from the teachings of Lao Tzu, and it states that the true self isn't rigid or defined. Instead, it is like water, free, flowing, flexible, adaptable. Because the Tao, or the way, encourages us to simply live naturally and in harmony with our surroundings. In Taoism, the self isn't self-centered. It doesn't act out of obligation. It is not obsessed with ego or status. But you still don't lose yourself in the process. You're still you, but you live more freely, you move freely, you are spontaneous, and you accept change. So if Confucianism tells you to play your part, Taoism tells you instead to just go with the flow. Okay. And now let's move on to Buddhism. Perhaps this is the most radical view of the self, which goes a step further and says, what self? Based on the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, Buddhism teaches us that there is no permanent self at all. That is right. According to the Buddha, the self is just an illusion or a trick that your mind plays on you. So let that sink in. All the things we cling on to, our names, our roles, our dreams, our titles, those personal desires, are just temporary. And clinging on to them is what causes our suffering. And in Buddhism, it also teaches us that the only way out of this suffering is to learn how to let go. Let go of those cravings, that ego, the things we cannot control, the fame, and let go of the idea that there is a permanent self, a permanent me, or a permanent you. Because when we do so, we find peace. And then we enter nirvana, which is not a place, but rather a state of liberation from the constant cycle of desires and attachment. So it's like realizing that all your life you've been chasing a shadow, and then finally you've decided to step onto the light. So that's something bright. So while Confucianism seeks to cultivate yourself, Taoism tries to balance it, and Buddhism aims to transcend it altogether. So let's circle back. Who are you? Are you the relationship you nurture in Confucianism? Or rather, are you the free, flowing spirit described in Taoism? Or maybe you are the ever-changing, impermanent illusion of the self, like the ones stated in Buddhism.
The concept of self in Western thought is a social construct which we can categorize in three ways: the individualistic self, the concept of self-sufficiency, and the self being rational. The first one is the individualistic self. This is where a child is taught to do what's best for the self. It pushes the child to grow up having an autonomous identity, meaning they become a self-governing body that can make their own decisions and are free from external control. the self to become autonomous, they must show independence and should not require help from other people when accomplishing a task. As adults, they would likely consider the self as being successful if they can fulfill life goals set for and by the self. The second one is the concept of self-sufficiency. This is where the self must be able to provide its needs without the help of other people. Being self-sufficient implies confidence in a person's capabilities to provide for their own needs. This concept places importance on the self to establish power and accumulate knowledge and resources in order to provide for their own needs. As adults, they would consider the self as successful if they accomplish their goals without aid from other people. The last one is the self being rational. This is Western practice that associates being weak and emotional with being inefficient. Everything the self does should be done within logic and reasoning. Under this concept, activities such as meditation and other metaphysical cognitions are considered wasteful because the goal is to be constantly rational and reasonable. Now, as they grow up, they would consider the self as successful if they invested time and energy in reason and logical thinking.
Now that we have learned both sides, let's summarize it. In Western thought, the self is built on individualism. It's about independence, being responsible for your own life, setting your own goals, and walking your own path. There are three ways to look at it. First is the individualistic self, where you form your own identity and make your own decisions. Like how teenagers in many Western countries move out when they go for college, finding out who they are apart from their family. Next is the self-sufficient self, where you learn to stand on your own feet, provide for yourself, and not rely on anyone else. And then last is the rational self, where you use logic and reason to guide your actions, staying calm and clear-headed even when life gets tough. In short, Western thought says be independent, be capable, and think for yourself. But let's turn the mirror around. In the Eastern side, the reflection looks different. In Eastern thought, the self is built on collectivism. Who you are is not just about you. It's about the people around you, your family, your friends, and your community. In many Asian homes, several generations live together. Big decisions like what school to choose or which job to take are made as a family. In schools, teamwork and helping one another are a big part of learning. And behind these values are philosophies that guides their everyday life. First is the Confucianism, which teaches us to live with respect and kindness, to do our duty in our families and society. Next is the Taoism. It means don't force life, let it flow. To live simply, adapt like water, and be at peace with the world around you. It means to go with the flow. And then last is Buddhism. It goes even deeper and tells us to let go of endless wants, let go of the ego, and discover peace in simplicity and compassion. So in the Eastern side, the self says you are not alone. You are who you are because of the people and the world around you. Two mirrors, two different reflections. One says stand on your own, the other says stand with others. Both have something powerful to teach us. Western thought inspires us to be independent and bold. Eastern thought reminds us to stay connected and kind. But here's the real question for you. When you look in your own mirror, are you the independent self who walks alone, or maybe the connected self who walks with others? Or maybe, just maybe, you can be a little bit of both.